Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
More than any other building, the U.S. Capitol stands as the symbol of the Republic. The building itself, though, is just one of many in an historical collection encompassing 18 million square feet of building space over 570 acres. Overseeing it all, the architect of the Capitol. The current architect has held the job for just about a year. Thomas Austin joins me now in studio. Mr. Austin, good to have you with us.
Good to be here. Thank you for having me.
And golly, I don't know where you begin to talk about what the architect of the Capitol does these days, but let's start with the Capitol building itself, which is one of the oldest, or maybe the oldest, that you deal with. And what are the challenges these days?
Okay, well, it is indeed the oldest building we have as part of our AOC portfolio. It began back in 1790 when it was authorized for construction. You know, Pierre L'Enfant, who was given the charge of constructing the Capitol of Washington, D.C., said the Capitol Hill was a pedestal awaiting a monument, which is a great line. I've always loved that. But the construction of the Capitol building didn't actually begin until 1793 when George Washington helped lay the cornerstone of the Capitol building. It's been constructed, it's been burned, it's been reconstructed, it's been expanded 9 times over its history. So what you see now is quite a bit different than what we had back in 1793. But it is our oldest building in our whole portfolio.
And what are the challenges of keeping it up to snuff? I mean, it probably got a lot of renovations after it was broken into on that famous inauguration day. But it's a building that is both historic, it's a museum, but it's also, I mean, people have offices in there, and there's thousands of people that traipse in and out every day.
Yeah, every day. It's definitely a working piece of historic architecture. And as you said, we have Congress has to do their job, both chambers of Congress, both the House and the Senate, conduct their business there on a daily basis. We have all their key staffers in the buildings, not just in that building, but also in the office buildings. But a lot of staffers run through it every day. We have a lot of dignitaries coming through. We host things like the presidential inauguration and the lying in state, like former President Carter's lying in state. But some of the challenges that we have is it is indeed our oldest building, and retrofitting the old technology to new technology, whether it be digital architecture or just their heating and ventilation systems, and keeping the building functional. But, you know, Congress hosts a lot of events there as well. We want to make sure that it is a welcoming, professional. It meets the moment for when Congress has people coming to visit them there or conduct their official business. And because our paramount mission is to make sure that Congress can do their mission, is that we have to schedule our repairs at times that does not impact their job. So we're always doing work at night. We have 3 shifts that work there every day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We try to schedule a lot of our maintenance during congressional recess times, but that's not enough time in the course of a year, so we do a lot of work at night. But those are, besides the aging infrastructure that is incorporated just in the Capitol building itself, the challenges of just keeping it, making sure our work does not interfere with Congress's work.
And you also then have the congressional office buildings and the Supreme Court and all of those other places. What is the fundamental challenge of old buildings besides the infrastructure of wiring for computers and so forth? And you've seen some bad attempts at updating, in recent years. But some of the buildings that Congress occupies for its offices are quite old, too.
Sure.
And how do you keep them up?
Well, Congress has expanded over the years as well. Not just the number of members of Congress, as the number of states have expanded or the representation has changed, but also there's staffing challenges have happened. So although the Capitol building goes back to 1793, we have office buildings both in the House and the Senate side that go back to the early 1900s. Cannon Office Building being one of more recent ones we were doing, which goes back to 1908. But its sister building, which was the Russell Office Building, was constructed basically at the exact same time. So on the House side, we have 5 House office buildings, and on the Senate, we have 3. So those always go back as long as 120 years ago. We're just finishing a major renovation of the Cannon House office building that will be complete at the end of this calendar year. And we're looking towards the future of renovating these buildings like the Russell Office Building on the Senate side, but also the Rayburn and some other ones as well. So the challenge we have with those is we have, as you stated, it's aging infrastructure. And because a lot of these buildings were built during the 1900s, we kind of hit, unfortunately, kind of the sweet spot where we're using both lead and asbestos, which obviously now we know not to do, but during the time were considered very useful materials in building construction. They were thought to fireproofing for asbestos, and lead to do a lot of things like rust prevention and things of that nature. Unfortunately, those created hazards, and as we do these renovations, we're remediating those, we're taking those out. But to take down a building the size of a Canon or a Rayburn or a Russell is a huge challenge, because we still have to make sure, as I said earlier, that Congress can do their job in finding space for our representatives and our senators to have an office for them as well as their staff. While we're doing a major renovation is a challenge. There's not excess space on Capitol Hill. We just can't, put people in in another building and call it a day. So finding that swing space is a limiting factor. Being able to do the long-term capital reinvestiture that these buildings require is also a challenge, because it's a challenge, of course, in terms of money, but our access and our authorizations, and we want to make sure that we're not making a disruptive experience, not just for Congress, but for all our visitors coming as well. Same kind of challenge we have with the Supreme Court or the Library of Congress.
We're speaking with Thomas Austin. He's architect of the Capitol. And what is the size of your staff? What is the office itself consisting of in terms of people and resources?
Sure. So we have overall, the whole Architect of the Capitol staff is just over 2,500 people, and we have them spaced out over 9 different jurisdictions is what we call them. They run the complete gamut of services, everything from what you'd expect, which is like engineers and architects, but also things like painters and plumbers and electricians and insulators and laborers and recyclers, and we have visitor guides and visitor assistants. We have very technical things like the folks who work at the Botanic Garden who do plant specialization, horticulture work. We have groundskeepers for the Capitol Grounds and Arboretum team that go out there and do not just the lawns, which is a huge part of it, but also our trees and our plants, bushes and shrubs. We have people do historical preservation. We take care of thousands of works of art. But overall, the 2,500 people in the Architect Capitol are just very broad spectrum of specialized skills and abilities, and it continually blows me away having this job less than a year, but just seeing all the different challenges that our team goes through on a daily basis. I was given a talk this morning to a group of kids that came in as far as a Bring Your Children to Work Day, because Congress is in recess right now. It's a nice thing we do for our team. When I see their eyes glaze over when we say that we do more than 500,000 work orders per year, I don't think people really fully appreciate that that's how many different little tasks that it takes to keep this huge campus working.
And one of the things you have to have in mind, I guess, is historic preservation itself. Even in a renovation of the Cannon, you don't want to have it come out looking like an airline terminal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Inside.
So, the historical preservation is something that we, as the foremost of our thoughts when we're doing and planning these renovations, probably second only to functionality of the building. But when we have those historic means and methods of doing construction, like in Cannon, one of our biggest challenges is just plaster, doing historic plaster work. Not something we do a lot of these days, and so the skilled trades in order to do that kind of work is limited. Same thing with our decorative painting, and we have things like guild work in some of the buildings that we, again, not things that we usually do in our modern office buildings, but something that we want to preserve this piece of history, because we talk about this in the Architect of the Capitol all the time, is that we are just one chapter in a long book of this history of this Capitol stretching back over 230 years in one direction and hopefully at least another 230 years in the next direction. But we are but one chapter, and so the sense of awe and wonder as we come into these buildings, we want to preserve that for the next generation. We don't want it to look like just a recently constructed office building of steel and glass. We want to have those columns and the plaster and the paintings and the murals and the mosaics and all those things that go into it, the statues and all those things that people walk in and they just say, wow, we want to preserve that feeling for the next generation as well.
And there are other capitals of the world that are much older than Washington, D.C. London is pretty old.
Yeah.
Paris, Rome, they go back quite a few. Jerusalem. Is there an international kind of knowledge base where if you have something like, how do I take care of that thing? You can call somebody in Rome, which might be full of it, and say, oh, yeah, we've done that.
Yeah, and I'm going to mess up this acronym, but there is a group called the International, Panel of Parliamentarians that is currently being headed by Canada. And so we do knowledge sharing between these different organizations. And it's an informal thing that we do. Just recently, I had the Lady Usher of the Black Rod came over from the Parliament in London. and her buildings go back all the way. It's more of a direct correlation to the Senate Sergeant Arms, but for us, they also take care of their buildings and operations, and we were sharing some of the challenges. And the two things that stuck out to her when she visited us were the size of our basement, because apparently back in the 1300s when Parliament was constructed, people were smaller and they didn't have as much space. So she was very envious of the size of our basements as far as our corridors and tunnels. But also she was really blown away by how well our floors were looked after, which I originally thought was kind of an odd thing to comment on, but because the care that our team takes,